Greetings, fellow adventurers. This is darkfireslide, and welcome to another, I guess you could call it a guide video for Pathfinder Kingmaker, although that's debatable. This is more of an opinion video, I suppose, about something that is a little bit controversial here in the game, and that's the quality and ranking of the individual companions that appear in Kingmaker. Now, I do believe that I have all of them unlocked on this file. If I don't have one unlocked, then I apologize. I haven't had time to finish the game yet since it came out. Um, but hopefully that this is still a complete list, and I can give useful feedback for people who are wondering what to look for in companions. So anyway, I'm gonna rank each of the companions in the game based on a number of criteria. So when you see them in this list, you know, bear in mind that this is based on, you know, my personal opinion and criteria as far as what I find useful and what I consider to be good. But it's based on a number of different criteria rather than just like one specific defining point. So let me go ahead and list what those criteria are. So first is the quality of their build when you first get them, whether it's at first level or third level, as you do get some companions, as well as their ability score or allocation, because this is going to affect their potential as a character both in their respective class, which is the main thing I'm going to be focusing on, and if you decide to multi-class with them, which is not something I'm as interested in, because when it comes to these companions, I find it's better for story reasons to just keep them as they are, rather than have them multi-class in directions that don't really make sense. And if you're going to multi-class anyway, why not just make a custom companion that's going to be maybe built better than some of these characters are, and you can kind of own it that way. But anyway, side rant over. So first we're going to look at the quality of the build. Second, we're going to look at overall usefulness of the character based on their character class and their build. Three, we're going to look at their potential. So maybe we don't get them, maybe they're not good early on, or maybe they don't unlock their full potential until like 16th level or higher. We're going to talk about that, and that's going to factor into whether or not I consider them to be, strong or not. And fourth, I want to talk about their party compatibility. So how many parties does this character fit into? Maybe you want to make like a couple mercenaries. You want to make like two or three, mercenaries, or maybe just one or two. And so you're not going to be having a full roster of nothing but the in-game pre-generated characters. So you've maybe got two or three of your own characters, three of the pre-generated ones. How do the pre-generated characters fit into another party, or even within other companions in the game? Now, I will say that these are based on how the class and character is supposed to work. I'm not factoring in bugs that may be apparent, may not be, depending on your own experience. If the class is bugged and I don't know it, I apologize. What I will say is that I'm working off what these classes are supposed to work like, not what they do. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the rankings. So I'm going to start from, and this isn't a numbered like value list. Now, just because one character is higher or lower than another doesn't necessarily mean it's by leaps and bounds. A lot of these characters are actually very similar in usefulness, albeit in different ways. But that being said, don't take it personally if someone's lower on the list than maybe you'd like it to be, because, again, this is my opinion, but also a lot of these characters, the difference in usefulness isn't, it's minute enough that you can honestly make most of these characters work. So that probably begs the question, though, why rank these in the first place? Well, I want people to maybe know and understand what I value in what makes a character useful, because that might help them define and ask themselves what makes a character useful. So anyway, let's go ahead and go into the rankings. So first on our list, and by the way, I think because I haven't said it yet, plot spoilers if you haven't gotten far enough ahead yet. Especially because you can actually miss some of these characters if you don't complete the story in a proper way. So just a heads up on that there are plot spoilers for this. All right. So anyway, on with the list. So first we have personally my favorite, or the best character in my opinion for the parties that you can bring in this game. That is Ikun Deo, or Ikun, however you want to pronounce his name. Maybe I butchered it, maybe I didn't. Point is, Ikun is a ranger, and he is remarkably well built. He starts off with an incredibly high dexterity. He has a really good strength score for a ranger. His wisdom is acceptable, and his constitution is decent for the class that he is. And this selection of factors, combined with the fact that he is a ranger, so he can wear medium armor as well as heavy armor made of mithril, since mithril armor is one category of armor lower. Um, he is very very good at what he is supposed to do. When you get him, he is also extremely useful for the chapter of the story that you're supposed to use him in, and the storyline quest that he's supposed to be a part of. So when I factor all these things together, I actually find that he is incredibly useful. Let's talk about why. So primarily Ikun is an archer. Now this may not seem particularly useful, but this adds a number of different things to his character that make him incredibly useful. So because he's an archer, he is a backline support character, but is also capable of taking damage and staying in the fight longer than something like a caster can under sustained fire, just because his armor class is probably going to be higher if he self-buffs or if he gets buffed by another party member, and he's also going to be able to pick out targets and take them down. So if there's a wizard at the back of the line, while your melee characters are engaged with kind of the trash, Ikun can target those backline casters and deal with them if they're particularly light or squishy. Now, one of the downsides of him is that you don't get him until about level 5 or so, and it's specifically in an area where he's actually really easy to miss, because sometimes one event can actually override getting him. So that is kind of a downside to him, is that you can miss out on getting him, I would say. And his personal quest lines can also be a little bit difficult as well. But that being said, he's incredibly useful if you add to what he has already been built to do. So again, one of the nice things about Ikun is that he has a very nice feat selection and build when you pick him up. You don't have to fix him in any way. All of the feats that he's given to start with are extremely useful for his build, and things that you would probably pick anyway if you were trying to optimize the build that he has. So for example, we start out with point blank shot and precise shot for his first two feats. This means he's able to shoot into melee combat without taking that nasty -4 penalty. Pretty standard fare for archers, nothing special there, although every archer pretty much needs to take this. For his second level archery style feat for being a ranger, he gets rapid shot. Again, another feat that archers are going to take. Perfectly acceptable, really good feat. Next, he takes weapon focus longbow, and on non-fighter classes, weapon focus is usually a pretty questionable choice. But what I will say in defense of this, for archers specifically, there isn't really a weapon apart from the longbow that you actually want to use. That being said, one thing that I'm working off of is that in the tabletop game, crossbows require you to take extra feats to be able to use as well as a longbow. But what I will also say is that a longbow, you can add your strength to your damage if it's a composite longbow. There's no such thing as a composite crossbow. So even the number of attacks per round aside, a longbow is usually going to be a more damaging, better weapon in the long run. And so there really isn't another choice for a pure archer if you want to do damage, barring some kind of like rogue, like sniper type build where you're sneak attacking. But for a pure archer, a regular old archer, pretty much rangers and fighters for the most part, and the one paladin archetype, weapon focused longbow is a solid feat to take because you're not going to be using other types of ranged weapons. You're just not going to be doing it. There's not really an option there that exists, especially in Kingmaker, to use as an alternative. So really, actually, this is a good feat because rangers and archers use two specific types of feats in order to actually function, and that's rapid shot, which makes you take a -2 to your attack bonus, so you're less likely to hit, but you get to make an extra attack at your highest attack bonus for the round, so that's incredibly useful in and of itself. But later, if you pick up the deadly aim feat, which is basically power attack but ranged, this helps negate the penalty from that as well. So normally, if you have deadly aim and rapid shot on at the same time, you're taking a -4. But if you've got weapon focus, that penalty is basically only a -3, like net, which is really, really good. And especially because one of the things that makes Rangers so good in the first place is because they can self-buff, which is something that fighters and barbarians lack, in my opinion, and monks for that matter. They lack the ability to cast self-buffs to make themselves stronger, and so they need to rely on buffing casters in order to help them achieve that higher level of damage and such. So Ikun is not only well built, he's also incredibly self-sufficient. The biggest downside is that you don't get him till 5th level, but still, he has incredible potential if you just keep him on as a ranger. And one other feat that he has that I haven't even talked about is that they give him boon companion to start with, for his animal companion, which means that even though he's a ranger, and normally rangers take a -3 to their effective level for their animal companion, his animal companion is treated as being full level, as if he were a druid or another class that gets an animal companion, which means that in addition to being an extremely effective archer, he also adds in a lot of hit points and damage into the front of the party. And the nice thing about animal companions is that you can use other classes to buff those animal companions to make them extremely durable. And so no matter what kind of party he's in, he provides both melee and ranged damage and health, and that's extremely useful, especially because he can self-buff, so he doesn't need to rely on other party members in order to be effective, even though he does still benefit from having that support, as pretty much any fighter type character usually does. And even if you don't want to take rapid shot and deadly aim, his actual regular attack bonus, because his stats are so well built, are going to be so high anyway that he'll usually be able to hit what he's aiming at 90% of the time if he's not using those special abilities, which you should have on anyway. The way the damage works out is that usually speaking, having power attack on and rapid shot on is better than not, even though your accuracy is lower. But I digress. Anyway, my point is, Ikun is probably, in my opinion, the best character that this game gives you in terms of pre-generated characters, and he has a lot of potential because he can pick up new and improved favorite enemies as time passes. His animal companion is really strong, and he's a really good archer in and of himself. Very well built, as good as, if not better than, a character that you could actually build yourself, which is something that you really want to look for in these kinds of, pre-generated, you have to work with these characters kind of people. Right. So that's Ikundeo, and he is my pick for what is the most useful character of the pre-generated ones that you get to start with. And again, I'm not going to go into what characters can multi-class into because, in my opinion, that kind of takes away from what that character can do, or what they were supposed to be in the first place. So, again, if you're going to multi-class, you might as well just build your own character because you can probably build it better, rather than trying to just salvage a pre-gen. Especially since you don't get a lot of them till third or, second, third, fifth level. I believe 8th level in the case of one of your companions, maybe 7th. Anyway, let's move on to the number 2 slot, and the number 2 slot is actually taken up by 2 characters, who I hold equally in regard for different reasons, with a slight edge to one, but I didn't want to separate the ranking because it's so valuable. And that is Tristan and Harem. I have tied for the second place slot of the most useful characters. And this has almost nothing to do with the quality of their builds, because to be honest, they aren't very well built characters for the class that they are. They're not. Harem isn't a horribly built character. He does have a flaw in that his charisma is so low, but Tristan has some issues, especially as the game continues to progress and you get further. So, but let's talk about these 2 characters and why they're important. So, of all the classes in Pathfinder, trying to run a group without a cleric, or at least classes that can consistently heal large amounts of damage, makes the game an order of magnitude more difficult than if you didn't have them. And while this makes sense on paper, what I want to specifically point out is that clerics can heal obscene amounts of damage. Even clerics like Harem, who don't have a very good selection of, stats to work with, whose charisma bonus works against his ability to actually heal damage, he's still an incredibly effective character just by virtue of the fact that he can heal, and in addition to channeling positive energy, as any good cleric or neutral cleric can do, he's also able to cast and convert his existing spells into healing spells. So both of these characters are extremely useful just by virtue of the fact that they can help your party recover both during and after combats. And that in and of itself is an extremely that is invaluable. You cannot put a value to how useful it is to heal during combat, because the problem is without a cleric, you can't heal 30 hit points at a time, or 60 hit points, or when you get to 6th level spells, heal upwards of 110 hit points in one turn. You can't do that with any other class in this game. So having a cleric in your party is almost essential due to how difficult this game actually is. And so both these characters are extremely useful just by virtue of being a cleric, because and that's just the healing. In addition to that, both of these characters also have a lot of buff spells and debuff spells that they can cast to either make your party soar to new heights in terms of their own personal strength, but can also completely shut down enemy encounters. For example, clerics have access to the Dispel Magic spell, which means that they can remove debilitating effects from your own party, get rid of things like stinging clouds, which I run into, debuff, take care of buffs on enemies. So an enemy gets hasted, you can cast Dispel Magic, get rid of it, and suddenly you're on equal fighting ground again. And so, just by virtue of being a cleric, both of these characters are, in my opinion, just exceptionally useful. Now, why does Harem have the slight edge over Tristan? And what are the trade-offs between these two characters? So Tristan is an Ecclesiathurge, which is a cleric archetype. Harem does not have an archetype. The problem with the Ecclesiathurge archetype is that they are not allowed to wear armor, they don't come with the ability to start with to wear armor or use shields. Now they can pick up the proficiency later, and I don't believe it affects their spellcasting. I haven't tested it, but I'm pretty sure that it doesn't, because it doesn't say otherwise, at least in the game. But that being said, the problem with Tristan's build is that because he can't wear armor when you get him, you need to give him armor proficiency. And the problem with armor proficiency is that it starts at light, which means that if you want him to wear heavy armor, which his dexterity would suggest that he should wear, although his strength is pretty bad, if you want him to at least wear light armor so that he's not, at 11 AC or 15 AC because he, maybe self-buffed or something. In other words, Tristan is an extremely frail character. He's still exceptionally useful if you use him correctly, because he will heal absurd amounts of damage thanks to his high charisma and extra channeling. To start with, when you get him, he can channel energy 8 times a day, which is really, really strong, especially if you manage to find a phylactery of positive energy channeling, which will increase the amount of healing he can do by 2d6, which is really, really strong, as you might imagine. Now, being an Ecclesiathurge, he also has another advantage in that he has a bonded holy symbol, which means that he can get back one of his spells every day. And this means that if you cast one of your highest level spells, and it's a game-changing spell, you can get it back and cast it again in the same day before you have to rest again. And that's just extremely powerful. He also gets the other Ecclesiathurge bonuses, such as being able to make an ally blessed, which is useful. But again, the main issue with Tristan is that he is, completely squishy, very easy to kill, will die to archers, and that's a problem because you can't draw aggro like you can in a lot of other RPGs. And so that's why I'm giving the slight edge to Harem, because Harem, while healing less, is a lot more durable. He'll have a much higher armor class pretty much at every point in the game, and he can still heal, even though it's not as many times per day with the channeling positive energy just because his charisma is so low, but he'll still be able to provide so much for the party in terms of his support. But anyway, that's enough about clerics. Let's talk about my number 3 character, that I consider to be like, this character is someone I would still really, really like to bring along in pretty much every party, and that's actually going to be Lindsay. Now, this is going to be a controversial topic for a lot of people. A lot of people don't consider Lindsay to be very useful. A lot of people don't consider Lindsay to be a pleasant companion to have, just because some people find her voice annoying, and I get that. Or I get where you're coming from. I personally don't have a problem with her, but the reason let's talk about Lindsay. So first of all, the quality of her build, it's so-so. It's not like crazy good. Bards can actually be built to do damage, believe it or not, depending on what you do with them. I believe I saw an arcane trickster build with her, or maybe it was a dragon disciple, which is pretty hilarious. From Nerd Commando Studios, I believe the name of the channel was. But anyway, the thing about Lindsay that makes her really good is, again, like the other two characters that I just mentioned, it's her class, actually, that makes her extremely useful. And the fact that she starts with a decent charisma. Not an amazing charisma, right? Because, to be honest, she only starts with 16 charisma, which is not ideal for a bard who's specifically going to focus on support. Ideally, you'd want to start with something like a 19, so that you can use your inspirations and cast more spells per day. But the thing about bards is that they're kind of a jack of all trades in terms of like the amount of support that they can do, and even well-built bards, like, they can do some damage, but Lindsay, the way she's built, is never going to do that. So, why do I consider Lindsay to be so useful, and why do I put her so highly on this list? So the thing is, Lindsay is one of the characters that you start with, and the early game in this can be especially rough if you are a good character who ends up with Valerie and a Miri, and you yourself are playing a martial character, so you have three martials and Lindsay. And basically, Lindsay becomes the linchpin of your party composition in that situation. She becomes the linchpin of a lot of parties, just because the support abilities that she gets for being a bard are so useful, and the feat selection that you can give her, since she's not combat oriented at all, she can take all kinds of extra performance feats, lingering performances. She can focus on save feats, so she just always makes her saves. She's just a very, very useful character for that reason. You can take things like improved initiative, like I did on her, to make her so that she goes first, so she can buff the party before you actually fight. And the other thing that makes her, useful and so high on the list is that she fits into just about every party that you could possibly imagine, unless you yourself are playing a bard, basically. So, no matter what party you're running, if you're playing a party of 6, you're going to have room for Lindsay because of the support abilities that she actually brings to the table, of which there are many, many useful things that she can do. For starters, the main thing that, is useful is Inspire Courage. So this just gives a flat morale bonus to attack and damage, which admittedly is something some spells can do. Actually, sorry, it's a +1 competence bonus on attack and damage rolls, and there aren't a lot of competence bonuses in the game. So this means that the attack and damage that she gives from her inspiration is going to stack with every other buff in the game for the most part, as long as it's not another competence bonus, of which there are few, if any. So this by itself is extremely useful because it goes up eventually to +4 attack and +4 damage at 17th level. And that may not sound like a lot, but the thing to understand is that attack bonuses give a lot more than they initially appear. And so do damage bonuses for that matter, but the attack bonus is the main thing here because a lot of enemies have high AC. They're wearing heavy armor. They've cast spells to buff themselves like you probably should be. And the ability to raise your attack bonus, especially if you're only using the pre-generated characters that don't have optimized stats, is extremely useful because then you're actually going to be hitting and doing damage much more consistently. And because her charisma is decent, and if you buff her, up to a certain point with items, and you get extra performances and lingering performances, she can pretty much always be inspiring courage. And I don't know if I can understate how useful that is because, if basically as a slot, you're taking an additional +1 attack and damage, +2 attack and damage at 5th level, +3 attack and damage at 11th level. And that's just one ability that you can basically always have on. And if you micromanage it well with the lingering performance feat, you can do this just an obscene amount of times, because what you can do is turn on the inspiration and then turn it off, and it continues for 2 rounds after you stop performing. So you can extend the number of performances that you can do every day like an insane amount, just by virtue of having this. In addition, with extra performance, again, you'll basically never run out. Um, but anyway, so that's just Inspire Courage. That as a class feature is awesome. It's actually one of the reasons I consider the Sensei monk to be so useful, although a lot of people don't seem to share that opinion for some reason. But anyway, so next we have Inspire Competence, and this is really cool because this is something that no other class in the game can do, right? Um, this is really, really cool. So you're walking in a dungeon and you come across a trap, and you really want to make sure that you don't set off the trap trying to disarm it. Maybe you've got Octavia doing it. Maybe Lindsay herself is doing it because, she herself is a bard. You can pop this on, and with lingering performance, it lasts for 3 rounds, which means that you're going to have an additional, +3, +4 to your check to not set off the trap in your own face. And it's also really good for being able to unlock doors to get treasure, which of course is going to help you run your barony, get items, etc. So this is actually an ability that low-key is really, really strong. It's because no other character can really do this the same way that Lindsay can, where she just gives a flat-out +3, +4, eventually +6 at 19th level to skill checks, which is just insane. Um, No, I mean, there's plenty of other abilities that she gets that make her really, really useful, and as she continues to level up, her inspirations get stronger and stronger and stronger, which is really, really nice. That being said, that's not the only thing about Lindsay. She can do all these performance abilities just as part of her class. She also gets spells, and she gets the same spell progression that the Magus, the Inquisitor gets, the Alchemist gets, and so in addition to inspiring courage, she can start a combat by casting haste. And if she has improved initiative, she has a good chance of going before everybody else, getting that buff off. She can cast the displacement spell. She can cast Cat's Grace for dexterity-based characters. It is a shame she can't get bull strength, but hey, no class is perfect. But so in addition to being able to do all these different things, she can also haste people and cast all kinds of crazy support spells. Because it's not just like haste; she can also debuff enemy parties using spells like Hideous Laughter and Cacophonous Call to completely debilitate enemies. If you're fighting a really strong enemy, you can hit him with a will save based spell, and he'll just never make it if you buff Lindsay's charisma high enough. You can even give her spell focus with like enchantments and such to make those saves even harder to make. And she's just a bard. She's a support character. And yet, like a wizard and a cleric, she can completely shut down encounters, which is just really, really, really good. And so, but the main thing with Lindsay is, again, she fits into like any party in the game. There is almost no party out there where having that additional attack and damage and skill bonuses is not going to be useful. So you can take her in pretty much every party that you have, and she's going to help you, and she's going to be useful. And so that's why I rank her so highly, is because of that compatibility with literally any party. Um, and her potential just continues to grow as she learns stronger spells, gets better at her inspiration. She's always useful in every combat for the most part, even if she herself is not doing damage with her crossbow, but she doesn't really need to, because she helps her companions fight so much better. And so that just makes her really, really, really awesome. Anyway, let's move on to number 4, and that's going to be Jubilost. Now, this is maybe where we're going to diverge a little bit on our opinions. Some people are going to consider Jubilost to be a better pick than Lindsay when it comes to a support character. And the main difference when it comes to Jubilost and Lindsay is that Jubilost can throw bombs and do a lot of AoE damage, whereas Lindsay does almost all of her damage through inspiration and through crowd control. So Jubilost is a lot more direct than Lindsay is. So using him is a little bit more straightforward, just because the main things that he's going to be doing are, specifically if you take the infusion, discovery, which you should do because it's really, really useful. So he can give his spells to other people, and that's really useful because alchemists can learn things like, cure critical wounds, cure wounds of any kind. Things like haste and the displacement spell, really good third level spells. I know I keep listing those as the big examples, but those are like some of the strongest spells in the game, level for level, and they're the ones that most people are going to see. So I just want to use those as examples. But anyway, so Jubilos does have that level of support that he can give to other people, but only if he takes like infusion. Normally, though, he's going to be a bit of a blaster, but he also has a lot of good support abilities um, through his actual discoveries. Things like dispelling bombs can help him, take out magic, as I have. And he's really, really accurate because he's a small character with those bombs, and his intelligence is so high. So he's a very, very damaging character, but he's also a good support character if you build him that way. There aren't really any problems with his build at all. He starts out with really, really a very sensible build. He's very much geared towards bombs, which makes it a little bit odd that he's not the Grenadier archetype, considering that that's what they wanted to go with him for a parent, like for some reason. But anyway, he's overall a very solid character. He fits into a lot of parties because he's a ranged character, but also because he provides a lot of support abilities. And so I do rank Jubilost 4th in that regard, and again, as he levels up, like most magic-based classes, he's going to get stronger and stronger until he reaches the end game. So anyway, that's Jubilost. Again, he fits really well into every party. I don't really have much to say about him because he is very straightforward. He throws AoE bombs that do a lot of damage, and he also supports his teammates similar to how casters can, and that makes him very useful. Right, so let's move on to the number 5, and this is the character you get the latest out of anyone, and you may not even get him if you're a good character. This is Knock Knock. And Knock Knock is, so if I ranked Lindsay highly because of her party compatibility, I've ranked Knock Knock because of the quality of his build. And let's talk about Knock Knock, because Knock Knock is really, really strong, and I just want to point out why. So first of all, Knock Knock is the Knife Master archetype, which means that his sneak attacks with knife-like weapons, so kukris and daggers and such, do more damage. Now, they start him out with weapon-focused kukris, which means that he's very, very likely to get critical hits with them. Now, this is where I kind of talk about bugs and how good a character is supposed to be versus how they actually work. And right now, it is entirely possible at the recording of this video that Knock Knock is horribly bugged and doesn't actually work as intended. So, I haven't actually tested this in combat. This is based almost entirely off of theory, but theoretically, Knock Knock is a very good character, so let's talk about why. So, the bug specifically is with rogue finesse training and how it works with two-weapon fighting. I'm almost certain that they're going to patch this because it is definitely supposed to work, but what likely happened is that they copied the slashing grace feat, which requires you to have a free offhand, into the rogue finesse training ability that you get at 3rd level, I believe? Yeah. So basically, that needs to be patched and fixed, but once it is, Knock Knock is a terrifying character. Like, if you look at what he can do in a single round, it's actually frightening. He doesn't have the highest base attack bonus because he is a rogue, but the thing that makes Knock Knock so good is that his dexterity is ridiculously high, and he is better than any character that you could possibly build for the same role because you yourself can't make a goblin character. So, barring any future mods or expansions that might add in more playable races, his dexterity's base is a ridiculously high number. He starts out with a 20, and he has a +4 racial bonus from being a goblin. So, his actual dexterity right now, with just a +2 belt of dexterity at 8th level, is 26, which gives a +8 bonus, which means that if these feats were working properly, each of these kukris would deal 1d3 plus 8 damage, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that when they crit on 18 through 20, or at least threaten a critical on those numbers, that's a lot of damage that he's going to deal just based on his physical damage. And even though he's taking a -2 to each hand because he's two-weapon fighting, he's still at a +15, right? Other characters of this level are lucky if they get that with just their like primary attack, especially of the pre-generated characters. So Knock Knock is just really, 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 really strong, and that's just like the base damage. Because of the way flanking works in this game, he's also going to be sneak attacking on like every round. And what's hilarious with him is that you can use a reduce person spell on him to make him even more likely to hit. He'll get another +1 to his hit, and he'll do more damage because his dexterity goes up. And so you just got this, like, you know, I don't even know, this little Pomeranian dog-sized character running around, chopping everyone's ankles off, and doing ridiculous amounts of damage. And again, the reason I rank him so highly is because his build is extremely good. Pretty much no feat that he has taken is wasted whatsoever. All of his abilities are in line and aren't any better than pretty much you could build yourself with a character in the same role. So he really is just incredible in that regard. Just due to the fact that he's a goblin and you can't do that yourself, and so he actually brings something unique to the table that you can't just do by building a mercenary yourself. But yeah, again though, kind of straightforward, like with Jubilost, it's just a lot of damage. But the thing about Knock Knock that kind of sucks is if you already have a bunch of damaging characters, you kind of don't need to bring another damaging character. So if you've already got your DPS, if you want to think of it that way, I'd prefer not to. But if you've already got the damage roll covered in your party, you don't really need to bring Knock Knock because it's already covered, even though he is really, really good at that. In a lot of cases, you'll want to bring support characters instead, especially because of the pre-generated characters. The support role is less hampered by bad building, as we've seen so far. Anyway, let's get on to number 6. And I put Regan Garr in the 6th place slot. He is an Eldritch Scion, which means he uses his charisma instead of intelligence as a magus, and a couple of other changes happen. Specifically, he gets a sorcerer bloodline, which provides a number of useful abilities. But the main thing with Regan Garr, in my opinion, is that he actually has a pretty good build compared to a lot of characters. So his strength is really, really high, which is awesome because he's a primarily melee fighter. His dexterity is decent. His constitution could be a little bit better. His wisdom sucks, which is not ideal, but his charisma is perfectly good for what he's trying to do. So he actually does a lot of damage. You can build a Magus better than this, but as far as what he's supposed to be doing, he actually functions quite well. And he can buff himself with a lot of spells to make himself function better in that melee role. And with the Magus and with the Inquisitor as well, since you do have one in your party, self-buffing is the name of the game. That's what makes these classes competitive, because they don't have the one base attack bonus per level like fighter classes do. Things like Fighter and Barbarian and Paladin, for example. But as far as that goes, he has a lot of good abilities, and if you learn his abilities in and out, they actually are quite useful. And that's a blessing and a curse, because that's a lot of micromanagement that you have to do in order to be able to use him effectively. But that being said, he has a lot of different options that he can bring to the table, in part due to his bloodline as well, because as a matter of fact, he gets a lot of useful spells. Fear is very useful, Dispel Magic is very useful, Resist Energy is very useful, Dragonkind is extremely fun because his base strength is so high in the first place. And with the way polymorphing works in this game, the additional strength that he'll get from those dragon shapes at those levels are extremely useful. So he's actually quite proficient at what he does, and his potential later in the game is quite good as well. The main reason he's ranked so lowly is because I don't think he's as consistent as Knock Knock is in the damage roll, because there's so much micromanagement going on, and that makes him a bit harder to use. And he's a little bit frail, to be perfectly honest. His armor class is something you're going to have to keep an eye on, and you're really going to have to learn when to put him into an engagement. You can't just have him charge in with everybody else, because he will get cut down rather quickly, unfortunately. His feat selection is alright. And it's nothing, special, but it is completely functional. He doesn't have any wasted feats, which is really good because some of these characters do have wasted feats, and that's a problem. But thankfully, Regan Garr isn't one of them, and he doesn't really have anything holding his build back, just because he's a pure magus, and so he's pretty strong in that role. Okay, number 7 on my list is Octavia. Now, Octavia is an interesting character because she has good potential. She can eventually become powerful. When you get her, she is not really that strong of a character. She has a lot of issues with the starting abilities and such that they give her to work with. So, for example, they start her off with skill focused trickery at first level. This is fine for a rogue, but the thing is, they kind of pigeonhole Octavia into being a specific prestige class, and specifically that's the Arcane Trickster. Now, the Arcane Trickster is a good class, and when she levels up enough and she's using impromptu sneak attacks, she can do a lot of damage with Scorching Rays and potentially nuke targets entirely, provided she takes point blank and precise shot, as you should, for her build, because she'll be able to use things like Scorching Rays to do a lot of damage. The problem with Octavia is in her build and in her class abilities and some of the design decisions that they made for her. So, her constitution is 8. This is a problem, as you might expect, because even at 8th level she has 32 hit points. Lindsay, a bard and a halfling, literally half of Octavia's size, has double the amount of, well, over double the amount of hit points. You may begin to understand where the problem is with Octavia's build. That alone makes her very frail. She will go down in a lot of combats, and taking combat casting on her, well, while I recommend it, can also be difficult just because she's already kind of stuck on a feat tax to get precise shot, and she needs to get accomplished sneak attacker so that she doesn't have to take any more levels of rogue than 1 before going into arcane trickster. The other thing that's really unfortunate about Octavia is if they just started her out with 2 levels of wizard instead of rogue, that opens up so many different build options for her just as a result of being a pure spellcaster. She could go into Eldritch Knight. She could go into just a pure wizard, but with different feat selections depending on what you want to do with her. The problem is that they give her 1 level of rogue and 1 level of wizard when you get her, which means that she is more or less locked into this arcane trickster path. And the problem with that is that while she will eventually get 9th level spells, she never really feels like a full caster. And the problem is the level of rogue that she has puts her 1 level behind what a wizard would be able to do instead. So, for example, a 7th level wizard can cast 4th level spells, and there's a lot of useful 4th level spells that wizards can cast. If we go into Octavia's spell book, I'll go ahead and point out these are 2 transmutation spells, the only 2, and I chose them because her specialty school is transmutation, but most 4th level spells are pretty strong stuff. I mean, you've got like the Phantasmal Killer spell from the Illusion Tree, which flat out kills somebody. You've got the Fear spell from Necromancy, which causes entire groups of enemies to run away if they fail their will saves. Obsidian Flow itself causes enemies to become entangled, and they take fireball damage from casting the spell in the first place. So that's really useful. And her specialty school of transmutation isn't completely useless because there are a lot of transmutation spells that do use saves, like Web, like Obsidian Flow, like Haste, and Slow specifically requires a will save. So it's not like it's completely a waste. The problem is that ideally what you want for an arcane trickster that's focused on doing damage through sneak attacks, you would want to take Evocation so that you can cast extra Scorching Rays and Fireballs every day and other rays that you learn along the way, so that you can still do you can do more of them per day, because wizards have less spellcasts per day than sorcerers do. So ideally that's what you would want to do with Octavia, but the problem is You can't because they give her this level of rogue to start with instead of 2 levels of wizard, which means that you can't really change much about her build, and transmutation itself isn't that great of a choice for the type of character that Octavia is. So there's a bit of a mismatch here in her actual build, and that's part of the reason I've ranked her so lowly, even though I consider wizards, spellcasters in general, to be extremely useful. And let me explain a little bit of the logic behind that. So the thing is, Knock Knock does a lot of damage, right? And he's really, really good at dealing a lot of damage when he's working properly. The reason that Tristan and Harem are more useful than Knock Knock, even though Knock Knock is going to kill more enemies, is that regardless of the situation that you bring Tristan or Harem into, they are going to be able to provide something to the party. They can cast buff spells against enemies that are immune to magic. They can cast crowd control spells like Fear on enemies with bad will saves. They can do all kinds of different things that make them useful in virtually every combat situation until they run out of spells. But eventually, running out of spells stops becoming a problem later on, especially when spells are so game changing. Now, that being said, even though Octavia is a wizard and a lot of her spells are very useful, a lot of the time in a lot of situations, she effectively is 1 level behind a pure caster at all times. And this means that when a character would be able to cast a certain spell level, Octavia is 1 level behind. And that's important because at certain points in the story, the game gets really difficult, and having a higher level spell compared to what Octavia is going to have makes her at times feel a little bit less useful than she actually is. Um, Especially until she becomes an arcane trickster when you first get her, and that makes her very frustrating to use, especially because early on she does have that level of rogue, which means that she can't really do much, especially because it takes a while to be able to pick up precise shots so that she can even shoot into melee with her bow, which she's not that good with in the first place, because she doesn't have a full base attack bonus progression, because she's a wizard. So there are a lot of issues with Octavia, but the reason I still rank her this highly is because she is still a wizard, and later on, she has very good potential. She also fits into a lot of parties because her buff spells that she'll get from transmutation are universally useful, and the damage that she'll deal is also very useful as well. But that being said, she's very squishy. Her build isn't very good when you first get her, and she's pigeonholed into being an arcane trickster if you want her to be useful for the most part. Because even if you make her a full wizard, she's still going to be 1 level behind at pretty much every point in the game. Okay, let's move on to number 8, and number 8 is going to be Thal. Now, we're getting near the end of the list here, and I want to make clear that I don't think Thal is a bad character, but the reason that I've rated her so lowly, and I'll just say it up front, is that you kind of have to build a party around her. What do I mean? What do I mean by this? So, Thal is undead, and this means that normal healing spells don't affect her. She can only be healed through the use of negative energy, and if you're only running a party of pre-generated characters, the only 2 characters that can do that are Thal and Harem. And now, granted, you get these 2 as a pair, usually, depending on whether or not you're evil, and whether or not you find them when you find them. No spoilers. But as a result of this means that, like, what normally would be an extremely effective character, maybe along the lines of Regan Garr even, is somewhat hampered by what she is stuck being. Now, because she's undead, I do believe she gets a lot of immunities, which is nice, and that does make her useful. And I actually want to make clear that even though she's so low on this list, she's not a terrible character at all. Because the nice thing about Inquisitors is that they are competent fighters. They are along the lines of the Magus, along the lines of the Rogue. They can do a lot of damage. They're sturdy characters that you can give heavy armor to if you decide to, and they're just very, very solid in that regard. And they can use swords and shields. You can equip them with bows. Although Thal is definitely built for melee, which is unfortunate given her race. Although because she has no con score, she doesn't really suffer any penalties. So whatever. Point is, Thal can self-buff, and the nice thing is, even though she is undead, she can at least heal herself. The problem is that when you're in melee, that's not always an option, because even if you take the combat casting feat, which I strongly recommend you do, I haven't taken it on this because I'm not really using her. The nice thing about even if you take combat casting, I should say, she's going to have issues staying alive, and that's a problem for a frontline character, because I believe she starts with a toughness, so she does at least get like a decent amount of hit points despite not having a Constitution score. But that being said, you really, really need to know how to build her in order to make her effective at being an Inquisitor. Um, her stats have a really strong spread, actually, even though her Constitution is non-existent. And she does have good stats for an Inquisitor, for a melee Inquisitor using a scythe like she is. But again, you really have to make sure that you have a character like Harem in the party, or that you maybe have a mercenary who can channel negative energy to be able to heal Jathal. But the problem is, if you have a cleric who channels negative energy, then you're not going to be able to heal your own party, and so that's kind of it's a cleric that's only good for offense, basically. Um, which again is interesting. If you could make your whole party like Jathal, then that would be pretty cool. But you can't. So there's a bit of a discrepancy when it comes to actually using her that makes her difficult to use. But that being said, like Regan Garr, she has access to a lot of really, really good self-buff spells, and unlike Regan Garr, a lot of her buffs can apply to other people as well. Admittedly, Regan Garr does get a lot of good buff spells for the party, namely Haste is the big one, and Displacement is pretty strong as well. But Jathal gets a lot of the divine ones as well, and so even though she's evil, you can actually teach her cure spells, so she can actually heal other living party members, which can be extremely useful, even though that does take up a spell slot. And her judgments that she gets from being an Inquisitor are really strong as well. And one thing that's really cool about Jathal is because of the way Inquisitor works, you get a lot of teamwork feats. And so if you're into that and you are willing to like take those feats on your other characters, she can really synergize well with a lot of different party members for that exact reason. So I don't hate Jathal. When I take Jathal along in my parties, which has been only a few times, admittedly, I really have no regrets using her. Again, you got to be really careful with her to get the most out of her. But as far as characters go, she's perfectly acceptable. I just don't think she's as good as the other characters that I've listed, and you kind of have to build a party around her, which is the main reason she's not that great overall, in my opinion. Okay, let's get on to number 9, and number 9 is going to be a Miri. Now, a Miri is a barbarian, and a barbarian's a really good melee class. The problem is that Amiri is not very well built in a lot of different ways. So first of all, her base strength when you get her is only 16. That is really sad and really bad, because barbarians usually need at least 19 strength to start with, if not 20, in order to kind of reach their full potential to start with. So she's gimped in terms of her strength, and then because of her character backstory, they give her this exotic weapon proficiency feat with bastard swords, and she has this gigantic sword that she has at the start of the game. But the problem is that because of the accuracy penalty you get for using that giant bastard sword, it actually makes her worse as a character, especially early on, before her attack bonus really fleshes out. And they kind of want you to take weapon focus with the bastard sword to go along with her backstory, and like you can do that if you care about the story, that's fine. But the problem is that you can build a character with fewer points than were used to build a Miri and have a better barbarian. And if you build the main character as a barbarian, you're certainly going to have a better barbarian than a Miri. So, bearing all that in mind, a Miri is... how do I put this? So she's a damage-based character. She's not going to have a lot of defense, even if you do take heavy armor proficiency like I did with her, just so she can stay alive a little bit longer. I even took defensive stance with her on this run, just to really try to help to keep her alive, to be kind of a frontline tank of sorts. But a big problem that she runs into, if you don't build her this way, is that she's very fragile on top of not having the offense a regular barbarian would have. So she's really, really kind of gimped from day one on what she can actually do. But the main reason that I at least put her before the bottom of this list is that she's at least capable of doing what her class is supposed to do, and with proper support, she can actually shine as a barbarian can. But I will say that specifically, that she needs support in order to be able to function properly, even when she's raging. But apart from that, as a barbarian, she deals a lot of physical damage. She has a lot of health, and apart from that, it's pretty straightforward. But that being said, if you have other damaging characters, you have other frontline fighters, maybe you brought like mercenaries and stuff like that, then they're probably going to be better than Amiri is. And her stats are, she has 16 strength, 16 con starting out. are not really that conducive to being much of anything else other than a barbarian. You could multi-class her into fighter, I guess, but like, I don't know. Personally, I just don't see that much value in what she brings to the table compared to what a lot of the other characters can. There's no real reason to bring a Miri over a custom character, and that's part of the reason like I rank her so lowly. It's just because she's really kind of like she can't get power attack until third level, and you get her at first level when you start the game, closer to second, but still, this is a problem because this is kind of like an essential feat for this class. And if you don't give her this feat at third level, you're stuck waiting until fifth level, and she's gonna be bad through then too, because power attack is kind of the linchpin of these kinds of like physical two-handing classes, and without it, she's just really at a huge disadvantage, I would say. But overall, she can still be useful if you give her proper support because she is a barbarian. She'll deal a lot of damage, be able to take a lot of hits. And that leads us to number 10, the 11th Companion. And this is going to be controversial, so I'll just go ahead and say it, and I'll explain my reasoning because different people are going to value different things. So this my number 10, like the least useful character in my opinion in Kingmaker, is Valerie. Let me explain why before you grab the torches and pitchforks and argue in the comments. Well, Valerie's the most useful character in my run, and etc. etc. So, the things that I value in a character are versatility, how well built they are for their class, what class they actually are, and how compatible they are with a number of different parties. If a character fits well into every party, like Lindsay, um, that is a sign of a good character. Valerie has a lot of issues. So let's talk about that. Valerie is not a very well built character despite what her stats might suggest. So her starting strength is 14, her starting dexterity is 13, her constitution is 19, and her intelligence is 9, wisdom is 10, charisma is 15. Now this is due to her backstory. She is a paladin who decided not to be a paladin and decided to be a tower shield specialist instead. So there's a number of issues that I find with her character that make me not want to bring her. Even though I like who she is as a character, I like the roleplay aspect of it, I like the story aspect of her character. I don't like bringing her along to actually play the game. And let me explain why. So, the Tower Shield Specialist itself is a direct downgrade of a class from the regular fighter. A regular fighter using a tower shield by the end of the game will have a higher hit chance and a and better damage by 4, just from the fact that tower shield specialists lose weapon training, which is one of the most important fighter feats out there, or fighter abilities I should say. A lot of the tower shield specialist abilities are really not that useful. Especially in Valerie's case because of the way that she's built. And let's go through them one by one. So first of all, Burst Barrier. Tower Shield Specialists get a +1 on reflex saves, again, while using a Tower Shield. Okay, so this is situational, but presumably you're going to be using a Tower Shield Specialist, a Tower Shield on a Tower Shield Specialist at all times. So technically situational, but not really, because you're pretty much always going to be using this. But the problem with this, especially in Valerie's case, is that reflex is not a good save for fighters. So the problem is that because it's not a good save for fighters, her dexterity is too low to really be dodging any fireballs or lightning bolts in the first place. So having this bonus is nice when your dexterity is 16 or 18, like it probably should be for this class. The problem is that her dexterity is only 13, so she's going to be failing a lot of these saves even with this bonus, which is a really, really big disappointment. And then next we get into the biggest slap in the face. The thing that makes Valerie's character choice completely horrible, in my opinion. And that's that Tower Shield Specialists get regular armor training, which improves the maximum dexterity bonus of a specific piece of armor. But the problem is that Valerie's dexterity is only a +1 in the first place. So when the maximum armor or dexterity bonus on her tower shield and her plate armor go up, she doesn't have enough dexterity on her own to actually make use of it. So you have to give her items or buff her in order to actually be able to take advantage of these abilities, which means she's even more so than regular fighters dependent on support, and this makes her not very good. She needs other characters to make her useful. And again, well, not again, but the problem with this is that she's not a very good damage character to begin with. All she's really good at is taking damage or being attacked and not taking damage. And you can build a custom mercenary that is infinitely better, has much more armor class and offense than Valerie will ever have. Just even with fewer points than were used to build Valerie. And you can get into min-maxing or whatever, but the point is Valerie is worse than a character with less points just by virtue of the fact that she's stuck in a class that just isn't very good. Now, even if you make her a stalwart defender, again, all she's really going to be able to do, especially without support, is just stand there and take damage and avoid it. And that can be useful. On the higher difficulties, you can kind of cheese the AI into attacking somebody like this. But if you're playing on the higher difficulties anyway, why not just build a custom party that's going to be better built than most of these characters? And that's the whole reason I'm ranking these, right? Is so that, you can know, or an informed opinion about which characters are good or which characters are not. And I think I'm going to get a lot of backlash for saying that Valerie isn't very good, but in my opinion, she just isn't, because she isn't able to actually use the majority of her class features. And the Tower Shield Specialist itself is objectively worse than a regular fighter. So even if you wanted to take this archetype that isn't very good, Valerie isn't very good at it at all. If she were a regular fighter, she would actually be an okay character. But because she's a Tower Shield Specialist, a class that her stats don't let her to take advantage of at all, she's not very useful. And she's one of the few, if only, characters on this list that I am able to say outright that I think she's bad. I don't think she's very useful. A Miri can at least be buffed to do tons and tons of damage and have decent AC by wearing heavy armor, but all Valerie can do is have high AC. Her will save will forever be garbage. Her fortitude save, because of her constitution, is good, which is nice, I'll give her that, but her reflex saves aren't high enough for what they're supposed to be based on her class, and that's a problem. That's a really, really big problem, because it defeats the purpose of having this archetype in the first place. It's a complete waste of a character. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on Valerie. A quick note on how I would build her is you do want to get things like shield focus, armor focus, etc. The Cornigon Smash ability after you pick up Power Attack, because her charisma is 15, if you give her enough persuasion, she's actually pretty good at using this ability, because it's a free action to demoralize her opponent, which can make them take a -2 to attack and stuff. So, I mean, it's not all bad news, but it's a lot of bad news for Valerie. And my general advice would be to, pump up her AC, but also try to give her a little bit of offense if you're going to use her, just because she literally has none when they bring her into the game. And another thing is that she has a wasted feat in the form of exotic weapon proficiency with the Bastard Sword. She doesn't need this at all. She could have armor focus at first level instead, but she doesn't, and that's a problem. Another thing that really sucks about her is her intelligence is only 9, and so she can't take combat expertise and use that as a means by which to trip people or disarm people, both of which are extremely useful combat maneuvers for characters with high AC, because it means that you open them up to being attacked by other characters much more readily. Tripped characters, for example, provoke an attack of opportunity when they stand up. They have lower AC when they're on the ground. Disarmed characters take AOs when they attack disarmed. So, I mean, both of those are extremely useful. Plus, it allows her to fight defensively without taking huge penalties to her attack bonus. But again, because of the way she's built, her intelligence is too low to get any of those feats, which is painful. It's painful because of the way that she's built in the first place. And so literally all Valerie can ever amount to in terms of potential is really high AC with decent damage, and that's nothing that you can't do with your own custom mercenary and do it a lot better. Um, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and conclude my thoughts there. Those are my opinions on all the different characters and how effective and useful I think they are. Again, I think most of the characters in this are pretty useful, with the exception of Valerie. And so as long as you know what you're doing and know how to play the game, you could make pretty much all these characters work if you don't want to make your own custom characters, which is kind of the whole point of using the pre-generated characters in the first place, is so that you get their story beats, which is like the reason that I like to use them and why I made this list. So anyway, just a recap of the list. In first place we have Ikundeo, second place we have Tristan and Harem, in third place we have Lindsay, in fourth place we have Jubilost, fifth we have Knock Knock, sixth Regan Garr, seventh Octavia, eighth Thal, ninth Miri, and in last place, 10th Valerie. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Standard YouTube fare. And if you like these kinds of videos and want to see more Pathfinder content in the future, or just like my voice and the content that I make, be sure to check out my Patreon, link in the description. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you on the next one.